Welcome to episode
42 of the Rex Chapman Show with my super dope homeboy from the L-Town, Josh Hopkins. We're in Lexington, Kentucky together.
Yeah, how about that? Good to see you, pal.
Yeah, so this is nice. What's going on, man?
Well, this is episode 42.
42.
What do we got there? There's some really
famous
good
42s. James Worthy comes right to mind. Who else for you?
Well, honestly, the first person usually that comes to mind is Richard the Master Blaster Madison. I always think
my former teammate,
Yep.
Richard Madison, 42.
I always think about him.
Yep.
Ronnie Lott.
Way
One
to
of
go.
the toughest men in the world.
Jackie Robinson.
The ultimate 42.
Who else? Elton Brand.
Elton Brand. Nice. Yeah.
Have you read anything?
Oh, but should we do our
We
segment
should do
on our book club?
Yeah.
Yeah, to enlighten our listeners. We do a little segment called Book Club. Talk about things we've read this week. I actually didn't read anything this week.
Nothing.
So I don't have anything for Book Club.
I didn't read anything either.
Oh, okay. That's been Book Club. But I got a question to see what you think about the other night, the Chris Paul incident with the fans that maybe put hands or talked to his family behind the bench there. You have any thoughts of that?
Yeah, I was at game 3 in Dallas, and I was sitting right behind Chris's mom and dad. So I know how the setup is. The seats are not directly behind the bench, but they're 3 rows behind the bench. And then I was a couple rows behind that. So I would have had a bird's eye view of it. I haven't seen any video to know what happened. I think the most telling thing is that the Mavs have come out with a statement saying that they're aware of the situation, that it will not be tolerated. So obviously something happened.
Yeah, well, the only video I've seen is Chris Paul really angry, saying, "I'll see you again.
Yeah,
I'll see you." Like he was, you don't see him lose it like that. I mean,
you
was
don't
really
see most.
angry.
Yeah, you don't see most guys, really engaged too much because look, people are at the game. A lot of them drinking, and they're off from work. You're going to hear a certain amount of stuff.
Yeah. Do you ever have somebody go too far with you? Where you said?
Oh yeah, but normally if you just give a look,
right.
And now then there are other times where you've got security behind the bench, and if somebody's doing something too much, you just tap the security guy and say, "Hey, come on, what's up?"
Do you remember one specific time that was worse than the other? Like somebody that was
no, I really
just
can't.
several over the line, but not way over.
Well, you get the popcorn thrown, you get the spitters. There's spitters that you can't really identify. You look back and like, what? Yeah, but you always have to remember. Just like, when I go to a boxing match or something, it's entertainment for me. I'm there to have a good time, yell a little bit, so as a player, that some of that stuff that just goes with it. And some of it makes you play better. You embrace some of it.
Well, let's talk playoffs real quick. Everybody thought your Suns and the Heat they were up 2-0 cruising, and now they've gone back and it's 2-2. Why have they?
Well, Dallas did what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
They held serve. Now it's a 3-game series, 2 of them in Phoenix. You got to like those odds. But that's how you have to spin it when you drop 2 games in Dallas.
Right.
And I can say this. I saw the last game in Phoenix, and Phoenix looked dominant. Like this is a 5-game series. It's not go to Dallas. Went to Dallas, saw game 3, and it was like Dallas was the best team and dominant and all of that. So, obviously the teams are not that far apart. Phoenix, being the lower seed, the number 1 seed, the pressure's on Phoenix at this point, just like it. Same situation in Miami. The only difference is though that Miami won 2 games with Embiid out.
Right.
And now he's back. They've won 2 games, and now they're getting Joel Embiid back down in Miami. That's a series to keep an eye on.
How about our guy Maxey?
Love it.
I mean,
I think from the first time I would go over and watch those guys and stuff, and maybe a little bit before you got to.
Right.
And I remember you guys asking me about him, and like when you watch him, he's smaller than you think.
Mm-hmm.
But the first thing that I think I said to you guys, he can slip it in the basket, and that's what he does.
Amen.
He's bouncier than you think. He plays with so much joy.
Yeah, that is fun.
Smile.
Mm-hmm. Fun to watch.
So thrilled for Tyrese Maxey. What else? Who else we got? The Bucks, Sixers, or no?
The Heat Sixers.
And then we got Bucks and Celtics.
Celtics. Yeah. What do you think about that?
I'm kind of pulling for the Celtics. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see them advance. Milwaukee's just boring to me. They're just boring.
Best player in the world.
Yeah, just boring. Oh, what do we think about the MVP was handed out?
This was something I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, or Joker got it, and the Joker's numbers are amazing. It's almost just like Joel Embiid. Mm-hmm. More assists, obviously, for Joker, and higher rebounding. I just don't get it. I get it. Joker's deserving. I'm not saying that. Mm-hmm. It just used to be different, where it was dependent somewhat on how well the team did.
Oh, I know that.
And that's really why I think Charles was never really considered until he got on a team, the Phoenix Suns, that went to the finals and almost won it all. I mean, I guess, Embiid's still playing, Devin Booker's still playing. Some of these guys on the best teams, I just think are, I don't know.
How like it's kind of like the Lakers sucked so bad, but LeBron had such a great year for them. You never heard him even really considered. Because they were so bad. But I mean, how bad is the fall off have to be that you don't consider the best player on that team to be deserving of MVP?
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at Denver, they got to the first round without Murray. Mm-hmm. That's what they were supposed to do. Mm-hmm. I mean, because you've got the MVP on your team. So they did what they were supposed to do. I get it. It's tough, and I love the Joker. I'm not hating on the Joker.
Here's a question for you, and we'll try and get to our guests that I'm really excited to get to. But 1 year, you get this player for 1 year, and you don't have no injuries to worry about. Both of them are fresh the entire year. Do you take the Joker or Embiid?
I take Joker.
Yeah. Okay, why?
I am enamored with the Joker's ability to catch the ball at the high post and dime people up all over the court.
Right.
You give up something defensively, of course, but I just feel like Joker's his vision and his ability to just spoon feed all four other guys on his team. I think that's unique. And he's just a load. Yeah. And he's better and bigger and faster than you think he is. Obviously. Right.
Yeah, there's no wrong answer there. Yeah. Okay. Well,
let's get to our guest, Josh. I'm pumped about this. We've got a guy today who's a stand-up comic, and who's very open about his struggles with mental illness and depression. Mm-hmm. So let's get right to Gary Gulman, who's also a huge basketball fan. What's up, Gary? Gary Lewis Gulman.
There you go.
I don't want to make you uncomfortable, Rex, but I've been a fan of yours since I read about you in Street and Smiths, probably in 84, 85. That was the extent of high school basketball scouting when you were coming up. Yeah. Street and Smiths. So yeah, you and the McDonald's All-American game was played and just nobody watched it. But yeah, we all wanted to be Michael Jordan, but the closest we could really get was maybe Rex Chapman. So you were just such an inspiration to us, and we love those Kentucky Nikes.
Yeah, man. Thanks. I'll take that compliment. No, it's funny you mentioned Street and Smith because it really that was the only way you knew anything. And I remember, I want to say I was probably a sophomore in high school and I got like honorable mention,
Right.
In one of the regions or something like that. And I thought, oh my God, I've really made it. I've really made it now.
Absolutely. But it was in 6-point Helvetica.
Yeah.
and newspaper print. Yeah. But let me tell you something. The boys were jealous.
How you doing? You doing all right these days?
Yes, I couldn't be happier. I always feared that my 50s would be a nightmare, and because my 40s were so bad, and I thought it could only get worse. But then I got my brain healthy, and I'll tell you what, it doesn't matter when you get healthy, you are grateful and you enjoy it. So it's really something. And I just before we get into my mental health, I want to say how important it is for male athletes, especially, to be open about these things, because for so long there was Terry Bradshaw, and every once in a while you'd hear about a celebrity opening up about their mental health. But there's this thing where you think, if I can just get successful enough in sports, I'll feel good about myself. And then you find out that 4-time Super Bowl winner Terry Bradshaw is unhappy, and you say, oh, I better do something different than just try to get better at throwing a ball around.
Josh and I were just talking about that, and I want to get into your growing up and all that, but we were just saying, the mental health thing, I can just remember, I gave him an example earlier of being, young and playing in the NBA and having enough money to do whatever I wanted, but really thinking, oh, you know what, if I get that Porsche, that's really going to be the thing that makes me feel content. And it took years and years and years to realize that, yeah, I felt good for 2 days. It was fine. And then all my shit again. So yeah. I can completely understand. So growing up, you grew up in Massachusetts?
Yes. Peabody, which was right next to Salem, Massachusetts, where the witch trials
took
place.
Right.
That's what everybody knows. And yeah, I mean, I felt lousy about myself, but the way we were taught growing up was that, yes, only rich people are happy. So do your best to get rich, and then you'll be okay. And then, like you said, growing up, I just strived, and so I was a basketball player, and then my basketball recruiting was limited to Division II and Division III schools. I went out for football my senior year, and I was just bigger and faster than everybody. So I got a scholarship to Boston College, and as a tight end, and I thought, okay, now I'll be happy. And it was a crucible, right?
Yeah.
Where everything, all of a sudden I'm playing against people my size, my athletic ability, and I'm overwhelmed mentally. And luckily, Boston College had a really good program, as far as it was called Learning Resources for Student Athletes. And it was kind of a program that was unique to Boston College, or at least it wasn't common amongst athletic departments to have that. So I went to the guy who was mostly in charge of setting up tutors and getting you retests. And I said, there's this thing I'm feeling where I want to jump off the highest building on campus. And he said, I want you to go talk to this man. And I started going to therapy once a week.
In the 80s.
In the 80s.
Wow.
Would sneak in and out because I didn't want a teammate or a classmate to see me coming out of the counseling services. I was so embarrassed. And I really believed up until recently that people would see me as weak and not manly. And the exact opposite thing happened when I opened up about it. It's almost dramatic how people have embraced me and opened up to me. And it's so gratifying. I mean, you know that.
I do. It really is. It just helps you get through, when people that you don't know come up to you and tell you something that you know that you're sharing it has at least helped a little bit, right?
Yes, yes. And in the 80s, it's so interesting because you're the ideal vessel for this, Rex, because people look at you and say he's handsome, he's well off, he's got great taste in specs. And how does this man struggle to get out of bed?
Yeah.
And it makes it human, and it tells you that the answer is not physical.
Yeah.
It's mental, and it's so helpful.
I just want to jump in and say to people listening that don't understand why we have a great comedian and a great basketball player on, and we're talking about depression and mental health. A lot of people might not understand how we jump right into this.
But it is the two things I'm most experienced with.
Yeah. But we've talked obviously basketball centric, but I'd say the second biggest topic we talked about is mental health on the show. We both have struggled our entire lives and freely admit it on the show and talk about it. Gary has a special, a couple of years old, called The Great Depresh. It was on HBO. It's on HBO Max now. You can watch it.
Timely that you predicted right when the pandemic was going to start to release the doc or the show. Great timing.
So it's if you've ever struggled at all, it's a must watch. It really spoke to me, Gary, and he explains his unique depression, how he dealt with it. And it's a very serious subject, but he does it in a funny, light way, and at times not light, but really sheds a light and onto depression and mental health in a way that I've never seen it presented before. And I want to thank you for that.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. I mean, the thing that was really helpful with that special was that we had my director, Mike Bonfiglio, was a documentarian. He did the 30 for 30s on Doc and Daryl, and he also did You Don't Know Bo and the Gary Shandling documentary. So he had a lot of experience with comedy, sports, and documentary. He's brilliant and humble and a really great friend. But we were able to weave in some heavy things and then go back to a comedy concert, and so it lightened the mood. And I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say I hear it's 2 years old now. I hear every day from somebody who said it helped me to share my feelings with my family. It helped them to understand. It made me feel less alone. And that's all I ever hoped for, even in my live shows when I started to talking about it, mainly because I had to. It was so obvious something was off about me that I had to talk about it. And also I felt, and you probably feel this way too, when you share these things and help people, it sort of gives some meaning to why you went through this awful shit, that you were able to help people out. It's I mean, this is exaggeration and hyperbole, but it's kind of like the Odyssey, where he goes and faces all these monsters and he brings back the elixir. So I feel in a way on a much smaller, less grandiose, mythic scale, we're doing that.
Well, you have. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
No question. I mean, and I wonder with you, because I know personally when I go and I'll speak to a group, and normally most everything that I talk about is kind of self-deprecating, right? And to just kind of bond with the audience. For me though, like, even though you go and you speak and you talk, it never, at the end of the night, it never doesn't suck. Like it still hurts. Like, you're talking about it, and yes, you've gotten some things out, but talking about yourself in that way, and it never doesn't suck. Like, I'll read an article about me, and at some point it's going to talk about some really, crappy shit. And that never doesn't suck, no matter how flattering the article might be or otherwise.
Right. It's kind of this scar that heals, and it's still there. But I mean, I think it does get easier. It does melt a little bit. I mean, one thing that was really helpful in regards to to speaking about it, because initially you think, well, who wants to hear this? And what really is it going to do? And I remember watching interviews and a documentary about Chris Herron, whose older brother was actually in my freshman class at Boston College. His older brother Mike was a basketball star. Anyhow, I've known about the kid since he was in 8th or 9th grade. He was sort of the Damon Bailey of Massachusetts. Yeah. And he said, if I can just help one person, it's worth leaving the house. And invariably you help one person. And I mean, as a comedian, you think, if I can make one person laugh, I'm awful. I mean, when you think about saving a life or making a life that's difficult easier, it is definitely worth it to leave the house to help one person. And it's still painful and it hurts, but it's just, I mean, I'm a Jewish man, and we have this saying that if you save one person, you save the world. And you're not really saving the world, but you're saving a world, which is that person's world. And it's really worth putting on the shoes and getting out there. So but I totally know what you mean. Some of these things that it just, you kind of have to relive a capsule of it from time to time. But the other thing with that, reliving the capsule, is I find it helps me to remain vigilant about the things I've had to do to get back and get my life back in order. So I don't want to exercise today. I want to sleep in. I think it gets really bad from time to time, that what the stakes really are.
Yeah.
You know, one of the reason it spoke to me so much is because we all have if you've experienced depression and battle it, they're all different to each person in certain ways, but ours is so similar to what you described as this debilitating, can't get out of bed, feel self-worth out the window, don't understand, just get up, just go. And you can't, and the weight of it, what you talk about, even doctors now will say it starts in childhood, or can, and it did for me, but I didn't know what the hell it was. I thought, man, I am the laziest kid in the world. Yeah. And when did you realize what you were dealing with was depression?
I can point to the symptoms at 7 years old and say, no 7-year-old should feel he has to do these great things in order to feel good about himself, get great grades and be the best athlete and please everyone. And I remember thinking, I would see people and think, well, if I was just a person who wasn't a star of whatever I did, how do these people face it and go on? And it's just such warped thinking. And I didn't have a name for it. I just thought, well, I really believed you get rich, you get happy. And unfortunately, that's kind of what our society is telling us all the time. I mean, it's a major component of capitalism to keep people working really hard long after they have the money they need. And you don't need millions and millions of dollars to feel like a worthwhile person, but there are all kinds of ad campaigns and promotions that make you feel that you need the Porsche, you need the Land Rover, but it doesn't explain what to do when you feel empty with all of that. So it wasn't until 18 when I went to that therapist, and I'm not exaggerating, within 5 minutes of talking to me, he was able to diagnose me with a major depressive disorder.
Right.
We didn't have the sort of, there are those, I've done this for friends because there's so much overlap with addiction and the 12-step programs and therapy. So with the addiction, I ask my friends questions. Do you find yourself unable to have just one drink? Do you find yourself using it to forget about your problems. And there are questions you can ask about somebody who's depressed, and you'll get these. And it was 2 or 3 questions, and he was able to diagnose me. But because there wasn't as much awareness, there weren't as many people speaking out about it, I had no idea. And I will say it didn't cure everything, but it was a tremendous relief to understand that this wasn't me. This was an illness and not a character flaw. I wasn't lazy. I'm not a lazy person. It's just so much harder to walk down the street with this illness than when you've recovered from it and when you have it behind you.
I've told this story to Josh before, but I was at Kentucky. I was a freshman at Kentucky, and I think back, from the outside looking in, I'm sure, and they were making me to be this kid that liked to go to class and taking all the all-American photos and all of that stuff all over campus and everything. And I felt like the biggest fraud,
right?
Like because I knew what my self-worth felt like. I didn't know how to articulate any of it, but was there. And I'd been, we're probably 7 or 8 games into the season, and woke up one morning and I had my hands like this on my chest. And I woke up, I told my roommate, Reggie, I said, Reg, I feel like I need to go to the hospital. And he said, what? I said, I said, go get the coaches. And he went to get the coaches. A couple of them came back, and they put me in the car to take me to the hospital. And apparently somehow during that time, they decided, better not take him to the hospital because people will ask questions. So I ended up going to a friend of the program's house. And for 2 days I was out there. They brought my girlfriend out there, and I hung out there. This is the middle of the season. I missed a practice, and then I woke up a couple of days later. I'm sure it was a panic attack. I'm sure it was, and it was I think I've just all of a sudden felt what you were talking about. I was like, if I only get a scholarship, and if I only go, and I was doing the thing I thought would, make me happy. And I think it just came crashing down. And unfortunately, I never got any sort of help like that until I was almost 30.
That's hard. Yeah. That's heartbreaking. The interesting thing, the best metaphor I've heard for it is for people like us, our self-esteem is this bucket with a hole in it, and we keep filling it with these things, and it leaks out, and we're like, but I had a really great game. And I feel as incompetent and inept going into the next game because that's the only game that counts. And I felt that way in sports. I felt that way in comedy. I would have a big show. I would do great. And then I'd be anxious and panicking before the next show, crying, trying to get out of it. And then I'd have a great show, and I'd say, what was that all about? And it would start all over again the next morning. I remember when I got to Boston College, they do these things where they have you jump, they have you run, and they have you bench press. And I was first or second amongst the entire tight end roster. And one of the players was an All-American, this guy, Mark Chmura, who played at the Green Bay Packers. Right. And I was second to all these guys. And they said, we want to, you're going to get playing time as a freshman. And I said, wait till they find out how talentless I am. What an old lady I am. And eventually the confidence I got knocked on my ass a few times. The confidence went away immediately. It was a house of cards. Wow. It was all based on some talent in high school. And I immediately was if it wasn't for the therapist, I would have either dropped out of school or worse. And there were points, and I don't know if you ever felt this, where I would have rather killed myself than admit that I was a failure as an athlete or that I couldn't cope, that those were the stakes, and nobody could have talked me out of it.
Well, it's interesting because in your special, you also talk about the time we all grew up in and how different it was, and how I hadn't really heard of what depression was, even at 20 or whatnot. I was still trying to figure out what was wrong with me. But we grew up in a time, thankfully, for people like you, we've been enlightened a lot of ways. We got a lot of ways, long way to go. But you talk about in your special, the time we grew up in and masculinity and the narrow view of it and whatnot. Talk about that a little bit, because we grew up in a weird masculine time.
Now kids are comfortable opening up about their sexuality, their gender, and I was not comfortable amongst my male athlete friends drinking Sprite. I was convinced that if they found out I was a Sprite drinker, I would pay for it the rest of the season. So there were no like Mark Ruffalo or Paul Rudd's. There were no guys who weren't Clint Eastwood or Bruce Willis or the Terminator. You had to be Schwarzenegger or you were Richard Simmons. There was nothing in between. It was just so hard. And so of course we hid any of our softness and our self-doubt because we were raised by it. At the time, I despised Bob Knight's philosophy. And yet that was the reigning approach to coaching men, which was to be cruel and insensitive. And they say that, well, look what he was able to do. But imagine what he would have been able to do if he had been a kinder, more thoughtful person. I really believe that it was incidental, the championships. I think the real approach was maybe the defense and also that he was able to recruit great players. But I don't believe in that philosophy. I don't think it's any better than what men and women are using now to coach their players.
It's so funny you say that. I just realized as you're saying that, I'm like, God damn, Bobby Knight, even as a kid, when I'd see him, I had anxiety.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh God, he's going to see me through the TV and say, "You're a pussy." I mean, he gave me so much anxiety but that was the standard bearer of what a coach was. That's what it was, and you needed discipline. And he just get in your face. I didn't go play better when coaches did that.
Oh.
I played better when he was like, "Hey, let's go. You got to do this." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'm still good." If he was like, "What the fuck?" I'd be like, "I'm going to go in the locker room."
Yeah, I mean, I had the basketball coach who literally, Season on the Brink, sophomore year, he was reading Season on the Brink in hardcover, which was way ahead of most working class people to be able to afford the books in hardcover or not get them at the library. He was reading it and quoting from it at us, yelling things that Knight was yelling at his players. And I remember thinking, this is not why Knight wins. He's also a great teacher of basketball and defense. The coach never taught me. I learned on my own how to keep my elbow in, how to follow through, where the stance came from, passing. He only taught me how to be afraid of him, which that's not teaching, that's not coaching. And there was an entire generation of horrible coaches like this who just damaged us. And also the thing that I can't forgive my high school basketball coach was that he made me hate doing this thing, dread going to practice, a thing that I loved and played for hours and shoveled out basketball courts and played it in thunderstorms until my fingers were bleeding and I dreaded going to practice. And I could have been the most loyal, productive player. And I turned to football because the football coach was such a thoughtful, kind man. That's the thing that when I think back on football coaches, they have a bad rap for being Bob Knights, for being cruel. Right. And I remember my freshman year of college, I was going home every weekend because I couldn't make friends at college. So I'd go home to my high school friends and my family. And one of the coaches, this guy, Bobby Wilder, and Barry Gallup was the tight ends coach. They sat me down and they said, I know you want to go home and I know you're homesick. You need to stay for the weekend, please. You'll meet people. And I remember thinking this was so kind and so thoughtful. And I was embarrassed that they had to take the time because I wasn't a productive player. I was a redshirt freshman, and I'll never forget the warmth I felt from these guys who are known as being drill sergeants, but they're not. The good coaches really care about their players, and I hope that's still in vogue.
Bob Knight recruited me. I knew my dad was kind of Bob Knight light, maybe more toward full Bob Knight, but I knew I couldn't play for that. I knew it. But it was a regional thing. So I had Indiana in my like top 7 or 8. I had to narrow it to 5 schools to visit. And back in those days, I think we called up the local newspaper and said, here are my 5 schools. And now this is going to run in the paper tomorrow. Right. And so, but Coach Knight called me that evening and he's like, hey, we need to set up an in-school or a on-campus visit, and I said, Coach, I just gave my list to the newspaper tomorrow and you guys weren't in the top. And right at that point, he hung up.
Wow. Wow. Oh, Rex, that's one of the greatest Bob Knight stories I've ever heard in my life. You could have gone along and gone for the visit, and you just could have kicked it down the road, and you did it over the phone. And I admire that, because I'll tell you what, when these men would call me, I wanted to do the hardest thing was telling them no. And because they came to my house and my mother cleaned up and made snacks. And it was so important for me to be appreciated by men of that caliber and that character, that to disappoint them, to say no. I mean, I could have told them, there was part of me in those meetings where I was like, oh, if you ever saw my bedroom with all the stuffed animals and the books I read, you would walk out immediately. You would do the equivalent of hanging up on me. But I was 6'6", 255, and I was fast. And so they saw something outside that was just not in me. And I wish I could have said, oh guys, I am going to disappoint you. and this is my heart breaks for you guys, because you're so earnest, and this is, but here's the other thing. That was my depression telling me that I wasn't worthy of this. And I think I was as athletic as any one of these people. And had I had the confidence and also the treatment I needed, I think I could have, at the very least, I wouldn't have beaten myself up for not being what these guys wanted. And that's the component of depression that people don't recognize, is how much you pay twice for being depressed. You feel lousy, and then you beat yourself up for feeling lousy. And that's the part that is so hard to separate.
I was thinking about this, and I don't know if I've ever told you this, but this was talking about it too, I think helps keep us honest. I certainly don't want to, have a bout where I'm MIA for 2 weeks, and that can happen fast if I let myself. But the sweetest thing, I was in Lexington. This has been a couple years ago, and I was in my head. I was having one of those days. I wanted to go work out. If somebody wanted that was my biggest fear. That day was like, I just want to get into where I'm going. And I got in, and there's a kid. And when I say kid, he was 18 or 19 behind the desk at the gym. And as I'm walking through, he tried to get my attention, and it wasn't a real great effort by him. And I just kept on walking. I don't want to, I didn't I wasn't mean, but I certainly was cold.
Right.
And I went in and I got my swim in, and now I feel like a normal human being. I've swam and I've exercised, and I'm walking back out, and he grabs me again, and I go, "Hey, how are you?" And he goes, "Hey, you're Rex Chapman." I said, "Yes, I am." He said, and he started to tear up and said, "You spoke 3 years ago at a thing, and my dad hasn't drank in 3 years, and he's never been better." And I just wanted to think, that's what he wanted to tell me. And I hugged him, and I wanted to just slink away, just like, what am I doing, you brat? Let's take the time to say something to somebody when they want to say something to you.
Right. I mean, a couple of things are going on there. One is that our chemistry is improved dramatically by exercising, especially swimming. I mean, swimming is the secret. My psychiatrist, Richard Friedman, is actually an avid swimmer and is writing a book about the mental effects of swimming. But the other thing that I never do, because I was so tired and exhausted all the time from just getting out of the house, and it's a Mark Twain quote from over 100 years ago: "If you want to cheer yourself up, cheer somebody else up." And I never thought I would have the energy to pursue that angle, but it is so true. So many times where I've been feeling lousy, I'll say, you know what, I'm going to reach out to I used to, when Conan O'Brien was on the air, I had a person who would book me to do comedy appearances, and I did several, and it was really fun. But what really gave me a charge and could take me out of the doldrums was getting a friend of mine or a younger comedian on the show and setting that up, because it got somebody else to feel what I felt the first time I did a stand-up show, and it was really the answer. So when you passed by that kid, you didn't know that you were going to be able to cheer somebody else up, and it's so easy in our position to make someone's day. Yeah. And they usually don't want very much. And they're thrilled when I take a picture or the hug or just you're not alone. Just saying that and listening to their story, and they're more anxious than we are. And it's just so helpful, and it's a secret too, and I'm sure it has something to do with our evolution, that this human community and connection increases our dopamine and our serotonin in our brains. There's a reason for it. It probably has something to do with survival that I would read about if I could comprehend any science.
You know, it's interesting you say it, because I often wonder, because our evolution, it stayed with us. We haven't bred it out. Depression, it's not. That usually means there's some benefit to society in some way for this character trait to live on. So do you think there's something to it that society can use the opposite or whatever? Or do you think that we're missing something that we initially, like fight or flight, that we grew up, we evolved with, that we're missing now? So our brains are preconditioned and wired to always run from that and do that, and we're not doing it. Do you think that is part of why we have this affliction?
Oh, absolutely. I was going to bring that up, because there are things that we've gone past in our evolution that are still there. So the appendix, we don't need the appendix. We also don't need this thing where we think every single interaction or every single performance is a test of our worth and our sustainability, and that brings about the panic attacks and the anxiety and the depression, where we think, oh, we can't survive, we're going to shut everything down and just survive, we're not going to thrive. And so that's the bad part of the evolution, is that we needed that at some point. We don't need it now for the most part. And a thing that I always stress to people, especially from our generation, is that we were taught to white knuckle it, fight through it, and that's how you get stronger. But in reality, you're damaging your brain, you're damaging your the gland that is spouting all that adrenaline and the cortisol. These are things that are really bad for our systems. So you should meditate or take medicine or see your therapist. You do not have to tough it out and fight it out, because you're making it last longer, and you're making it even more likely that you will take longer to get out of it, or that you may not get out of it. I believe that you can get out of these situations eventually, but you're strengthening this thing. And my psychiatrist says that all the time, because I sometimes for panic, I will take a half of a Klonopin and I will say, no, I'll tough it out. But if my breathing technique and some meditation doesn't work, I take that half a Klonopin and I don't feel guilty about it. My psychiatrist said, you're doing more harm than good by trying to white knuckle it.
Just having anxiety and social anxiety, I have a big problem with. Sometimes you're on, sometimes you're not. But I always say, like, I hate red carpets.
Yes.
It's just. But the difference between my first interview on the red carpet and then as I go through it to my last, I want to go back and be able to talk, because I'm like, yes. And by the end, after talking to 14 outlets, you're like, yeah, what's up? You seem like a cool guy. But it's like, can we have a warm up before that?
But it's all reps, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, the misses help too. You refocus, and the ones where I really did badly, I learned from. And it used to be that they would crush me and I would want to quit the entire thing. But now I say, you know what? You weren't prepared. That's usually the case. I wasn't prepared, or I was tired, or I hadn't eaten, or a number of other things. But mostly it's just I came across this thing at the right time in my life when I really needed it, because my mood was dependent on my last performance, and growing up, it was always dependent on my last game.
The box score.
If we won and I played well, I felt great. If we lost, I felt terrible. If we won and I played poorly, I felt terrible. So there were very few instances where I felt very good about myself. And I read this thing, and it was by the playwright Samuel Beckett. And I tried reading Waiting for Godot a dozen times. I can't get through 3 pages. But he had this thing where he says, ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail better. And fail better became my mantra, that I didn't have to be perfect. I could screw up, I could bomb, and next time I would do better. I would learn something from it, the audience had a complete control over how I felt about myself the next day, and it's too much. And in basketball, the rim and the refs had control over how I felt about myself until the next game. And that's no way to go through life. You need some control, or you will wind up in the fetal position, like I did so many times.
How do you handle those times? Because it kills me. I know everyone a little bit, but like I call them like right before you go to sleep or in the shower. I'm always like doing, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, remember that thing you did when you were 14? What a dumb fuck. You're terrible. You're a terrible person. I hate myself. Like stuff, it's irreverent. It means nothing, but those are the times it comes back to me, and I'm just like, I'm terrible. How do you deal with that? How can I do better?
When you are in your right mind, you have perspective on these things. So this is a great example, because when I was in a full-on crisis, there wasn't a moment I was awake when I wasn't contemplating suicide. So I mostly tried to sleep. But I remember spending an hour with a therapist about having been mean to this girl when I was 8 years old. And for an hour, I kept, and it was a reason why I shouldn't live anymore. This thing I had done. And he said, I know you feel terrible. Here's the thing. You're trying to rewire your house while it's on fire. And as I look back on it now, I still feel bad about that. I still regret it.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized I was 8 years old, and in my right mind, I have that perspective to say 8-year-old boys are cruel. You grew out of that. You have the human response is guilt and regret, but you cannot beat yourself up. And almost as if, and I'm not an overly religious person. I believe in God, and I believe there's something in the universe going on, but I hadn't spoken to that girl in 30 years. And she sent me a message out of nowhere as I was recovering, saying that she had seen a show and congratulating me. And I realized from that message, she hadn't thought about it as much as I had. And it was such a lesson. It was almost eerie. And my wife and I have this Mercury in retrograde idea where we have things in our past coming back on us, and that was one of those moments. And I'll tell you what, it was a real lesson. So when I have those things and they're frequently in the shower and I cringe and I say, "Oh, you asshole," I think about that moment. One, I was a different person. I've gone out of my way to make up for it again and again. I won't do it again. And two, the other person hopefully has not been considering it as much as I have, and it's very unlikely that they have. So that's just part of being a human who cares about people. So it's actually a good thing. A sociopath doesn't consider what they did 10 seconds ago. So for us to have that feeling, and it's generally from about 6 years old to 18 where we're growing and we have these crazy ideas. But here's the other thing. I have things that I wish I hadn't said that were 2 or 4 years ago. And
Yeah.
I have to live with them and make amends when it's practical and won't make that person feel worse.
Let's talk some basketball.
Yeah, it's
Let's talk.
He's got Rex Chapman here, and we've just been peppering him with depression. Let's give him a chance to live this.
I want to know who's winning it all.
I believe it's going to be Boston and Golden State.
You're a homer.
You think all the other teams will be depressed then? I'll just keep taking it back.
I think it's going to be Boston and Golden State. I wouldn't mind a rematch of the 1976 NBA championships with Phoenix and in Boston. I say this every year. So I always say this is my favorite Celtics team of all time, but I've been saying this ever since 1981. But here, I have a question that I was meaning to ask Bill Walton. I did a show that Bill Walton was in another room signing basketballs for a corporation or a retreat or something like that. And I got to meet him for a moment, and I fawned over him, and I was so obnoxious, and but I didn't ask this question that I've been wanting to ask somebody who's been around Del Curry and Steph Curry, and it's this, and also has seen a lot of shooters. Have you ever seen anyone shoot this far, from this far, and this accurately in your days as a basketball player?
No, of course not. But those honest to goodness, the very first time I stepped on Stephen was born my rookie year,
right?
And Dell and Sonia lived 2 doors down, and so Stephen was my little buddy from an early age. But Dell was the best shooter I'd ever seen. When I stepped in,
that's what I've heard.
Yeah, and this was this was humbling, but it was obvious. Like, I'd never been on a team where I probably wasn't the best shooter. And like my first practice or two, being on the floor with Kelly Tripucka and Del Curry and Robert Reed and these veteran guys, those guys could shoot. I could get hot, and that kind of remained that way. But Del, his touch, his big hands, which Stefan has, which of course Seth has also. The thing that I'm most blown away by is that he does it off the dribble.
Yes.
That he's an elite 3-point shooter off of the dribble, which is, that tells you too, he has such great, I jumped too high on my shot, to be able to do that. It just didn't work that way. His center of gravity and balance, he's got perfect balance to be able to, no matter how he's coming off, be able to square and get it off quickly. But that he can do that off the dribble blows me away.
It's so impressive. And I have this analogy, and you've walked right into it with Del Curry and Steph. I feel in terms of 3-point shooting that Del Curry is the Old Testament God, and who's popular amongst mostly middle-aged Jews. And then there's Steph Curry is Jesus, who changed the game and went global. And so I've had this theory. Nobody else would get it because only a few of us remember how great Del Curry was. But I was able to walk right into the perfect audience for this. I mean, I was always a fan of the pure shooters who really, when we were growing up, they were put in there to open up the lane for the big man and to keep people from doubling down on the guy they were trying to get the ball to. And I hear so many old men complain about the game. And for me, it's never, for a person who loves watching people make long shots and everything that goes into that, because it's what magic really is. We know there's no real magic. It's the amount of time you have to put into the trick and the illusion. That's the magic. And that's how I feel about basketball shooting. When I go to the court and I shoot from NBA 3 range, it is every single component of the form is so, you can get away in the mid-range game with having a quirk, a hitch in your shot, but from 24 feet, it has to be so pure. So I kind of miss those guys from when we were growing up, the World B. Freeze and the John Mal Wilkes with the bizarre styles, the Purvis shorts. But what they do now, I mean, Kevin Durant's form is like a metronome, and Steph and Kyrie. I mean, I'm just in awe all the time, and I don't think people recognize. And also they say nobody plays defense, which they've been saying since the 70s.
Yeah,
but they're playing defense harder and closing out better than I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. I mean, we could hold and grab. If you can't guard anybody. And the other part about that is, like, we talk about it all the time. I remember being a kid, and like one of the first recruiting classes I remember was like Ralph Sampson and Sam Bowie, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember? Those guys could play like they play today, but they wouldn't let them play that way.
No.
They would not let them play that way. Now that everybody can play facing the basket and shoot threes, you're telling me today Charles Barkley wouldn't be shooting threes? He'd be shooting threes. The other thing that just blows me away about, and it should make sense, we all see the Bob Cousy dribbling around in a circle with his right hand, right? It almost never touches his left hand. If I scored 10,000 points in the NBA, 9,900 of them were with my right hand. I wasn't going in, jumping off my right foot and flinging up a left-handed hook off the backboard, which they all can do today.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, what they can do with both hands, the passing. If I was going to dribble left baseline, if I had to make the pass to the corner, I would cross body it and throw it with my right hand. I wasn't picking it up off the dribble and throwing it with my left hand. Everybody can do that today.
Yes, I love it when I mean, most of the color commentators are former players, and they'll stress it, the teardrops and the runners. They'll say, you have no idea how difficult that is. But also just the using the rim as a protector and coming out on the other side with the left or right hand. They do it so easily. I would practice that and go 8 for 10 with nobody there to guard me. It was just extraordinary in there. And when you bring up Ralph Sampson, I mean, I swoon because we got glimpses of the future in Ralph Sampson at Virginia freshman and sophomore year. And then they made him play a low post game. But this was a guy with a beautiful handle. And that's the other thing. I go to the courts. I live in Harlem, and I go to the courts and I'm playing defense against these teenagers. And their handle, I come home, my hips and my knees are so sore because I mean.
That has nothing to do with their handle, Gary. Hate to pop that bubble. Rex has this one story he always forgets to tell at the perfect times, and I like to tell it anyway. Because he and Steph, he and Dell and Muggsy all lived in the same
apartment
complex when they were playing together. And he says that they'd get in the car to go someplace and hang out, and he'd be like, we thought we were big shit NBA players, and it turns out the best player was strapped into a seat in the back.
and it wasn't Muggsy in the car seat. It was Stephen.
That's the thing. Did you ever read the Boys of Dunbar?
No.
Oh man, you will love it. It's
the high school Dunbar team.
Yeah, it's about the Muggsy, Reggie Williams, Reggie Lewis,
David Wingate
team. But what's so clear in that book, and those, I just named 3 of the best basketball players in history, certainly in high school basketball history. Muggsy was better than all of them.
All of them.
Which just, and I mean, you talk about an inspiration and also, by all accounts, just a terrific human being. I mean,
friend of the show. I was just with Muggsy. I was just with Muggsy a few weeks ago, and it's exactly that. And I said that in our, we were talking about the original Hornets team, and I came in and Dell came in, Curry, and then a year or two later, J.R. Reed, and then Kendall Gill, and Larry Johnson, and Alonzo Mourning. They were looking for a star like for years and years. Muggsy was the only star. I mean, he was the biggest star. If you go, I mean, he can go anywhere in the country, but he's just one of the best stories. And also, Muggs wanted to go to Georgetown. He was dying to go to Georgetown.
I didn't realize that.
Boys were going there, and he ends up going to Wake Forest. Got his degree. He's helped his brother for the last 20 years. Chuck hasn't done any hard drugs in 20 years. But Muggsy's a good one.
Yeah, he was on the show, and he missed his call. I mean, he was a great basketball player, but he was a really great, and could you imagine if he centered on the wrestler?
Oh yeah. Never lost a match. He wrestled all the way through to 8th grade and never lost a match. And I saw him, I tell this often, but J.R. Reed was constantly playing around, and we're in the locker room one day after practice and get out of the shower, and J.R. Reed pops Muggsy with the towel, and Muggsy had enough of it and turned around, and they're both naked and squaring off. Dell and I are sitting there and this has been going on for, a while with you could wrestle and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Before we knew it, Muggsy was back behind JR, picked him up and dumped him on his head.
Wow.
6'9", 260.
That's the best Muggsy Bogues story. But Muggsy's center of gravity.
Oh yeah. Just and 5'3", and his thighs are that big around. He could have been Dan Gable.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
No question. Gary, what's your favorite movie?
I would say my favorite movie is Goodfellas. I've watched it more than every other movie, but I mean, it can be a bummer. So I would say Rocky. I saw it in the theaters with my older brother when I was 5 years old, and so that movie really makes me happy. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. What about if you could have dinner with anyone in history? You know, anyone alive or dead, you could sit down, break bread with. Who would that be? That's a tough question.
It's a really tough question, but I would have to say Kurt Vonnegut. He's my favorite. Yeah, he's my favorite author. I've read everything he's written at least 3 times.
Wow.
But here's the thing. I just started reading probably 5 years ago, Toni Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I've read at least a book from everyone who is considered our greatest American author, and I think she blows all of them away.
Wow.
I'm in awe. The thing is that if I met with Kurt Vonnegut, I have more questions. So I think I love how I'm taking this so serious.
That was what we were doing.
Yeah, we like it.
Well done.
And then same basic question, front row center to any band, singer, entertainer, dead or alive.
I would have to say Pink Floyd during the Wall. I was always too young, too afraid, and too poor to go to any great concert. So I feel so like this summer I'm going to see Rage Against the Machine, and it's like, yeah, it's tough to rage at 52. I'll be 52 when I see them. The only thing I'm counting on is that there'll be a whole section of us. People my age. I'm sure they're as ragers against the machine. They have to deal with their mortality as well. But I can't wait for that. So this is the closest I can get to seeing the Wall.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's
fantastic. Well, Gary, can't thank you enough, buddy. You got to come back and do this again.
I hope that my enthusiasm came through. I can't tell. I was explaining to my wife, who's younger and didn't get Street and Smiths, how significant this is for me. And so she understood. So I hope you guys understood how much this meant to me. And I just hopefully we'll be able to if you're ever in New York City, I'd love to even if it's just for a few minutes to have a very masculine hug with a lot of punches in the stomach to make it clear that we are men.
Maybe a Sprite.
No ice.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, guys.
Talk to you soon, buddy.
Thanks so much.
Fantastic.
I mean,
I could have sat here for another 2 hours. I hated that we had to talk basketball at some point.
I loved it because you could tell that's what he wanted.
Oh, yeah.
He's sick of talking about his special and whatnot. He just wanted to talk to Rex Chapman.
How great was that?
But I was just kept going. And also,
I have several notes down here I couldn't even get to, and you got 2 pages of them.
That was a lot of fun and unique to the show.
Yeah.
And we talk about mental health so much. It was great he's perfect. Comedian, athlete, and mental health enlightener.
I think we know just from going to therapy how many people struggle like this and how many people do the things that he talked about, that we talk about. If I can only get to do this, if I do this, then I'll be happy. Mm-hmm. Then I'll be content. Mm-hmm. And it's just a big lie.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's something going on.
Yeah.
And you got to take care of it. And to his point, we did, like in the 80s, I always go back to this one guy. Remember Art Schleister?
Yeah.
Big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, he was, when we were kids, 10, 12 years old, he was at Ohio State, world by the tail, we all thought, right?
Yeah.
And, he spent the better part of, 30 years now in and out of correctional facilities, been in and out of trouble, gambling issues. What it would have been like, it would have been so great for us if he, like at 25, could have been telling his story to us or to little kids or whatever, and sharing his story it would have helped us.
Yeah,
right.
For sure. That's why I encourage anyone who's had depression and mental health issues, even, slightly, or just understand it or empathetic to it, if not sympathetic, to watch that special with HBO Max, and I'm sure you can watch it other places, but the Great Depresh, Gary Gulman really talks about it in a meaningful way, but it's funny somehow. That's the genius of what those guys do. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's episode 42 of the Rex Chapman Show with super dope Josh Hopkins from the L-Town. And join us here next week for episode 43, powered by basketballnews.com.